Hey guys, so I'm doing my second installment of my teen drinking stories. First of all, if you haven't seen my first video, I went through all the harmful effects of teen drinking. The biggest, response I got back was people wanting to know my own personal experiences, and I want to do everything I can do to help you guys, and I want you guys to be able to learn from me and still think of me as a good role model and a good person, but I want to, admit the things that I did wrong and share my experiences. Today's story is actually going to be about cops busting parties, running from the cops, all that kind of stuff. If you guys hear noise down here, of course, it's little Daisy making some noise, so sorry about that if that bothers you. She loves to just jump on me whenever I'm filming. We used to do this thing out in high school where we would go to this big bonfire, and it was so fun. We'd always do it in the winter. It'd be like something we would do every single weekend. All these kids would get together, and people would bring like their truck beds, and people would bring guitars, and we'd all hang out, and we'd have a big fire, and people would make s'mores and whatever, and of course people would occasionally drink there, and it just turned out to be this thing that just would be like a routine. Like everyone just knew we were going to this place, and there was a name for it, but I'm not gonna say the name obviously. So one night it just kind of got out of hand, and there ended up being a lot of kids that didn't normally come showed up, and eventually the cops ended up showing up and everyone took off running. Now we were kind of out in the middle of the woods, and so this was in like the middle of January. It was pretty cold, and I had like high-heeled boots on. It was kind of more of like a fashionable outfit, but typically we always were just hanging out, like sitting on the fire, so I didn't really think about the fact that I would have to be running through the woods in these boots. So it was really hard to run in them, first of all, and second of all, the guy that I was with thankfully stayed with me, and we ran off and whatever, and we ended up meeting up with a big group of kids, and we were running, and people were yelling, and they were saying the cops were like going to send dogs into the woods and all this crazy stuff. And eventually we all stopped at this one really dark area, and we heard like this rumbling noise, and it just was such a weird sound, and we looked over and there were probably like 20 horses, like huge giant horses, and like cows, bull type looking things. I don't know like what they were, honestly. It was really dark, but they were big and they were mad. We had apparently like crossed over this fence, and we were on their land, and they were just like staring at us, and everyone just took off running. And it was like the craziest thing because we were kind of out in the country, out in the woods, but to like run up and just come so close to these giant animals, it just seemed like something out of a movie or something like so surreal. So we kept on running, and there was a road that went down like below where we were, so we were hiding like up in the hills, and we could see this road, and we could see that there were like 4 police cars just parked on it. So we knew we couldn't go down because if we went down, the police cars obviously were sitting right there. So we had to wait up on this hill, and it was so cold, and I remember like 4 or 5 of our really close friends, we were all like huddled together and trying to like stay warm because we had to sit out in the woods for like probably 3 or 4 hours, so it kind of sucked. But on the one hand, it was really like an adventure, and eventually one of our friends came and they drove up the road and somehow got past the cops and got us into their car, and we all drove back to their house, and everything was fine. No one got in trouble, and we survived that camp out that got busted by the cops. But apparently some kids did get in trouble, and some did like turn themselves in. I think when people were hiding out in the woods, the cops like yelled out and they were like, "Come out now, or we're gonna send the dogs out," and some people like came out and turned themselves in. So that was one story of running away from the cops at a party that got busted. Now my second story happened, and this was a party that was like a friend of a friend, so I didn't really know the person hosting it very well, and it was also like 45 minutes away from my house. And so I went with my friends, and I didn't drink a lot just because I didn't know the people really, and I don't know, I just didn't really feel like all that comfortable. Inevitably, it got busted, and it was like probably a decent sized party, like 75 kids maybe. And what ended up happening was the person's mom was home, and she was, I guess, sleeping in her room. She had allowed her kids to like have this party, but she just didn't want it to get out of control. And so when the cops knocked on the door, I think there's a law in Texas that they can't come in the house unless you like invite them inside. But since this mom got up and answered the door, and I guess she was angry that the kids were being loud and that they had caused so much commotion that the cops came, she like answered the door and I guess like let the cops come in. and everyone just ran, and people started hiding in the bathrooms, they were hiding in like closets, people were like opening the pantry and hiding. All these kids were hiding, a bunch of kids ran off. It was a mess. So the cops come in, they yell, and they tell everyone to get out of the closets, sit down. These cops were very, very mad, and they were just screaming and yelling and super just intimidating and angry. And so everyone kind of gathered in the living room, and a few of the kids that ran off randomly, I guess, like got caught outside. Like a few kids couldn't get over the fence and the cops ran out there and got them. So those were like the first kids that had to go get breathalyzed, and then they got tickets actually. I think they got some MIPs and like just stuff written up for them. So they were going to breathalyze every single kid, and if you weren't drinking, you could stand up and tell them you weren't drinking, and you still had to do the breathalyzer. And if you were drinking, you could they still wanted you to do it, but I think the law is you can say no or something. I don't know. I don't really know. It's confusing, but whatever. Basically, they got everyone up in a line and they just started making people blow. And since it was like 70 or so kids, I just like waited in the back of the line. A lot of kids like started eating cookies and chips and trying to like sober up by eating a bunch of food, but I just pretty much waited to the very end of the line. And by the time they got to me and like the last 10 people, they were so annoyed with like talking to everyone's parents. They made everyone call their parents to come pick them up. Talking to everyone's parents, like writing all the tickets out. They kind of just like skipped the last 10 people, and they didn't make us blow anything. So they didn't write me or like me and the last 10 kids any tickets, nothing. Of course, my parents came and they were very angry at me, but they have told me for a very long time that if I'm ever in trouble or in a bad situation, to just call them. One thing that I do remember was once the cops came inside and they were asking everyone about who bought the alcohol, and since the mom was home, they were going to charge the mom that was at the house with supplying to minors unless people kind of owned up and explained like who bought what and whatever. And I know some of the kids that brought some of the alcohol ran off, and then a few of kids stayed, and a few people did like kind of own up to it, and they were like the first ones to stand up. And there were like these two guys that I know, they didn't bring any of it, but they decided to just own up to it so no one else would get in trouble. And I don't know, I thought that was kind of cool. They definitely like took one for the team, I guess, because they admitted something just to like prevent everyone else from getting in trouble and to prevent that mom from getting in trouble. Just know that if you are drinking underage, cops find out, you know, those things tend to get busted a lot, and cops take that very seriously. Your parents will probably be very mad, so just be careful, be safe. Like I said, I'm not promoting teen drinking, just trying to be very open and honest about my experiences, because maybe these stories will, you know, just give you some insight or maybe scare you off from doing it. So I hope you guys enjoy this video, and I'll see you next time. Bye!